Congressman Faultroy, one of his conversations that he would have all the time, and particularly within the nonviolent movement, was this statement that he really wrapped a lot of ideas around. And it was essentially asking the question, will East and West sensibility solve North and South problems? He would ask us, will the worldviews and the cosmologies of those from the East and from the West, and he really talked about it in terms of West being Africa, East being Asia. Will the sensibilities, the way in which those people, if you will, saw the world and sought harmony not only with one another, but with nature, solve the destructive behaviors he viewed to be taking place between the North and the South? And that's always stuck with me, that there is, from his standpoint, and grew to be my standpoint, a natural connection in the ways of thinking, not just philosophical, but ontological, axiological, cosmologically speaking, between Africa and the East, such that if there was the appropriate energy given, that it is plausible that many of the problems we see even today might be addressed to some real humanistic conclusions. That's always stuck with me, and that for me brings me to this moment. The question about what happens and how does, in our case, some possibility around artistic expression look when you do that. And what's the nature of that conversation and that discussion? And fortunately, we have one of those rare moments where we can explore that. We can think about that. And on behalf of SUNY Old Westbury, now I got my cheat sheet. I'm gonna pull it out in a second. On behalf of SUNY Old Westbury, I wanna thank you for giving us this opportunity to ask a question that's been powerfully important to me, developmentally and intellectually, as I think about how do we solve the human conundrums that seem to spring up almost on a daily basis. Thank you very much for hosting the conversation, sponsoring the conversation. I do have to thank Haiwan for once again being brilliant in that what's becoming very usual way, for bringing this piece together. And now I'm gonna pull out my cheat sheet so I can make sure I don't forget anyone, right? And if I forget someone, charge it to the paper, not my heart, okay? I want to thank Dr. Ronaldo Anderson, the curator. Thank you very much. Now, we discovered, he knew before I knew this, that we have a link. I went to the grad program where he's now teaching. And so we possibly get one another on a whole lot of other levels that we can't go into here, but I want to thank you. Thank you for giving our university this opportunity to see your work and your brilliance at work. Tim Fielder, he couldn't make it, and his name would be Tim, huh? No. But Tim Fielder is a part of this. Okay, well then we got to thank him as well in his abstention. Fatima Logan Austin, who we saw, where? Oh, she left. But what was fascinating, I could see Chuck Davis. I can also see Carrie-Alma Welch-Asante in her work as well. If you're in the dance, you know both of those names. And it was fascinating to watch her work. All the dancers from Yes I Can Performing Arts Center. Who, did I miss them? I'm sorry, I missed you, I apologize. And to our panelists, Dr. Ryoko Yamamoto, which we know, and we know her to be brilliant. From our sociology department, Kevin Farrell, adjunct teacher, musician. Thank you, Kevin. And the other volunteers, many other volunteers, Zhong Feng, Yumi Nicholson, and gallery intern students. Thank you all. Thank you for making this possible. And with that, enjoy the program.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Sams. I know he's very busy, so he took his time out of a very busy schedule. This exhibition, Turning to the East, Intersecting Futures and Afro-Asian Connections in a Multipolar World, a very long title, couldn't be possible without help of many individuals. I would like to first thank Black Studies Center for sponsoring part of the costs for the exhibition, Jermaine Archer, and also OWWR radio station for setting up all this setup, audio equipment, Joe Manfredi was a very, very important helping, and also Media Innovation Center, they are recording all these events. And these two are my frequent collaborators. I can't really have a recording and this kind of system without them. And then I would like to thank Jian Fang and Yumi Nicholson. They are in costume. Yumi, what's the name of the costume you're wearing? So I reached out to them because this exhibition is really supposed to bring these connections together, and Jian Fang and Yumi Nicholson have been very active in bringing the voice of AAPI community. And Jian Fang also recruited all the dancers from Yes, I Can Performing Arts Center. And then Fatima, who was actually my former student, now teaching here, and she's an incredible dancer. Once I saw her on stage. And then all my incredible gallery interns, Jordan, Amanda, Janice, and they not only helped me with installation, but also designed the posters and lots of other duties. And then I would like to give a sincere thanks to Vicky, our department assistant, for providing so much help for us. And of course, lastly, the curator, Reynaldo Anderson, and all the artists who are participating and the panelists who agreed to join us this evening. So let me introduce formally Dr. Reynaldo Anderson. He is Associate Professor of Africology and African American Studies at Temple University, Philadelphia. Dr. Reynaldo is currently Executive Director and co-founder of Black Speculative Arts Movement, BSAM, an international network of artists, intellectuals, creatives, and activists. So we have 4 Brazilian artists in the show out of 10 artists currently. He is the co-editor of following anthologies and journals. I'm just going to mention a few things, long list. Afrofuturism 2.0, The Rise of Astro-Blackness and Black Speculative Arts Movements, Black Futurity, Arts and Design, Cosmic Underground, A Grimoire of a Black Speculative Discontent, among many, many others. So Dr. Anderson, welcome. And then let me introduce the 2 panelists here. Dr. Ryoko Yamamoto is Associate Professor of Sociology at SUNY Old Westbury. Her research interests focus on international migration, social stratification in contemporary Japan. Her sociological curiosity is often drawn to processes of boundary making, boundary breaking, and societal reactions to boundary breaking at the intersection of cultures. She couldn't be more, she's a perfect panelist for this exhibition. And then Kevin Farrell is our another panelist. He was raised just north of San Francisco in Rohnert Park, California. His first musical encounter was with the piano in the 3rd grade. By age 13, he was performing regularly all over the San Francisco Bay Area. An opportunity to join a songwriting and production team led Kevin to New York, where he currently resides. The move resulted in Kevin garnering songwriting and co-production credits for artists such as Drake, Jennifer Hudson, Didi, Music, Soul Child, Lil Wayne, and Rick Ross. And more recently, Kevin launched his own production studio, KFM, which has published 100 pieces of music and continued to land placements for network, television, film, video games, etc. He's currently teaching global music and jazz music history here at SUNY Old Westbury. Please welcome all panelists and curator.
Thank you so much for the invitation to bring these ideas and concepts here. Thank you, Hewan, for inviting me. And we both were connected by Lysandra. There she is right there, because she saw my exhibition at Carnegie Hall a couple years ago on Afrofuturism and the Black Angel of History. I totally forgot to thank you. Because I met Lysandra's mother, who was in charge of everybody when we came to New York doing the event. And I was thinking a lot what Dr. Sam said about when East versus West and how philosophies are chosen. A piece I wrote once talked about the impact of certain parts of the black community that believed in nonviolent direct action that were attracted to Gandhi, and then the other faction of the black community attracted to Mao or Ho Chi Minh or Kim Il-sung. And when I think of my family's from Mississippi, from a small descendant of people. That's why I don't ever say I'm from kings and queens. I'm the descendant of some angry enslaved African from Mississippi who were glad when Grant was burning down Vicksburg, cheering on the defeat of the Confederates, who would then later become, as the one writer would call it, those bronze men that would then march on the South after Lincoln and burn the South down, which is why I don't really believe some of the people in Congress that are talking that stuff. They don't want a part two of Gone with the Wind, because that didn't go so well for them. And so, but my family had the tradition of picking up the sword, because my grandfather served in Korea, and I remember sitting on his front porch when he's smoking the cigar, and I was like, "Granddad, what happened in Korea?" He said, "Son, grandson, it was like fighting an ocean of people." And I think he's describing when the Chinese army came down out of the north and how they almost pushed the Americans into the sea. And my father, who, when he was in college, he was one of the 5 final young men from Jackson State that was going to be selected to integrate Ole Miss. But James Meredith was picked because he was older and he was a Korean War veteran, and they figured he could take the abuse better. And so, and I remember finding out stories when I grew up that my father, even as a college student, and I thought I didn't take it serious at the time, he used to carry a gun all the time because he was registering voters. And it didn't dawn on me, okay, registering voters, it could get you killed in Mississippi in the 60s. And so I guess I come out of that black Southern gun tradition. And so when I joined the service, of course, I decided to pick the hardest one, the Marine Corps. And I was born in Okinawa, Japan. My older brother was adopted out of an orphanage there, half black, half Japanese, Kinjo. And it was Kinjo growing up as my older brother, because my dad had been his baseball coach in Okinawa. And when he adopted him, and it was he that introduced me to this anime called Speed Racer, Ultraman, and I'm that generation that started out watching early anime, playing Atari with Pong. But then, but from my southern roots, we would, as me and the artist John Jennings, we would walk around with a lucky rabbit's foot. So you see this cross-pollination of hoodoo with some Asian influences that get us to some of the stuff we've been creating recently. And I remember most about my service overseas, the things I took from each culture I was exposed to. I remember when we go to Hong Kong, I was so impressed when I come from a nightclub, maybe 3, 4, 5 in the morning, and on the terraces of Hong Kong, if you have ever seen it, you see the elderly people doing Tai Chi. And then Japan, the Japanese sensibility was different, and I was attracted to that culture because, as I said, A Culture of the Sword, I used to read Miyamoto Musashi's book, The Book of Five Rings, and study Bushido as a Marine, because in my 21-year-old mind at that time, I said, oh, Japanese, they know how to fight. And amongst ourselves, we talked. They said, you know what? America does not have a winning war in Asia. They have one victory, a loss, and a defeat. So we need to study these people in terms of what they can teach us about art, science, culture, being better fighters, so forth, and adapt this African-American cultural sensibility to that context while we were stationed in Yokosuka. And what you see here on out of the art hanging up, in the back, that is Alan St. Clark's. You would have seen it when you first came in. There was a time in Black American history, prior to the 20th century, the most influential culture on Black Americans was Japan, because they were considered leaders of the people of the world of color, because they had defeated Russia in a war. And some of our greatest thinkers like W.B. Du Bois and others said they are the vanguard of people of color in terms of following the Meiji Restoration. They swiftly embraced modernism. And in one generation, we're trying to figure out how did they go in 1-2 generations to become a modern militarized society able to compete. And at that time, before World War II, nationalism was not a dirty word. And so a lot, and leading up to World War II, the majority, a significant number of African Americans were supporters of Japan over the United States. It was kind of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, when you think about segregation and Jim Crow. And they had what was called the Pacific Movement going on, where agents of the Black Dragon Society were organizing in the country for when Japan, I guess they had figured if they were ever going to fight the United States, a lot of Black Americans would help them if they ever landed troops in the California coast. And it's during that Pacific Movement that a young Elijah Muhammad, the founder of Nation of Islam, a lot of them in the 30s, the radicals, were influenced by Japanese agents. And after Pearl Harbor, the government had to go and threaten all the Black American newspapers to not say anything nice about Japan, because up to that Pearl Harbor moment, Black Americans said, well, you say the Japanese are this, but you're no better. The Japanese haven't done anything to us, so we're for the Japanese. And so this is kind of where you see the backdrop of what makes America like, you know what, we have this large population of people, we probably better eventually integrate. You know, because one of the things I philosophically have embraced is that America never treats its formerly enslaved African citizenry right unless America has a powerful enemy. That's the only time they treat us with they got some common sense. And that happened during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and that's why at the end of the Cold War, then all of a sudden you see people, oh, we don't need affirmative action and all these other things anymore. And so what Alan brings out in that sequential art representation is the attraction to Japanese culture for over 100 years now by the Black American community as the first Asian community to defeat a European power. Behind me here you have the influence of Islam indirectly in this picture, because without Noble Drew Ali, who founds the Moorish Science Temple, you don't get certain elements of hip hop or the Nation of Islam and Malcolm X when they talk about supreme mathematics, because Noble Drew Ali starts a heterodox version of Islam here that then later you get Nation of Islam, then you get Malcolm X, so forth, and you see the influences showing up in hip hop in New York City. To my left, that's Lauren Howard. Now this is the part of the movement I don't understand as much because I don't do cosplay or whatever. I understand all the rest of it, but cosplay is not my thing. And one thing, I always ask Lauren, why is she fascinated with this character, Sailor Moon? And she talks about they have entire conferences now on cosplay. The cosplayers outnumber all of us with some of the interest they're in. Here in the back, you have Shannon Theus, who is demonstrating what she calls the crane technique. Shannon's from Los Angeles. Her father was a member of the Sun Ra Orchestra, jazz band, you know, and so you can see, when she was thinking of putting all this together, she's thinking of her father, who was a percussionist with the orchestra when he was alive. And to my left, the Korean depiction there, that is from an Afro-Brazilian artist, I think it's Fausto, because Brazil has the largest Japanese population outside of Japan that's been living there a long time. And then behind here, you'll see the work of Zyka dos Santos, and Kofi Basil Smith. He is the first American manga master. He trained in Japan for years, speaks fluent Japanese. He's getting ready to give his MFA, and I think he's going to be at Rochester later this year. He trained under some manga masters for years, and he's the first going to be considered the first American manga master, and he's also a boxer. And Zyko dos Santos, who is kind of like my woman counterpart in Brazil, like I always told her, she has such a large movement of people that she works with down there as a digital scientist, and what else? She does so much, a DJ, an artist, and she's just amazing. And she has the representation of what you'll see the black women carrying the sword on the other side of the wall there. Make sure I'm not forgetting anyone. Oh, and then a close friend of mine, Tim Fielder, this depiction of Kuri Kuchiyama, Grace Lee Boggs. Both of them were both revolutionaries in the 1960s and 70s. Yuri Kuchiyama was a close friend of Malcolm X. Grace Lee Boggs was married to James Boggs, was, I believe, a Marxist theoretician. Of course, you see Kamala Harris, Afro-Asian first vice president, and then Helen Zia, who was an advocate for same-gender relationships. And that's why I was telling Tim, we got to definitely have something to represent Women's History Month. They're going to be sensitive about that. So I will not have an exhibition without something devoted to these women leaders and their contribution and some of the people they influenced when other leaders were alive. And in the interest of time, I'd like to stop right there, and I will take my seat and turn the program back over to Haywan. And once again, thank you for inviting me, and I believe Haywan is going to be moderating.
Since I have worked closely with Reynaldo, I wanted to ask you a question about what's your working process working with the artists? I know you're...
Oh, the working process. And one of them recently thanked me, and I definitely, I would say my organizational tactical stuff, I have the scholarly Afrocentric aspect to my work, but there was a piece that was written by Dr. Asante and Yoshitaka Mike out of the University of Hawaii, Manoa, that talked about Afrocentricity and Asian-centric perspectives, how they can cross-pollinate and communicate with each other. And that's what I was thinking about when I had the show. But in a practical sense, sometimes when you're dealing with an international network of artists with different languages, so when we have meetings, we have to translate from French, Portuguese, English, because one of the more interesting parts of the network and the most dynamic part of it now is coming out of West Africa from African Muslims who are using Afrofuturism as an anti-cultural thing to prevent Arab domination and French neocolonialism. And that's what you see sometimes with what's going on in West Africa now with Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. There is an awakening on the continent now that we noticed when we started our work there back in 2018. I told some friends, I was like, man, don't pay attention to too many people over the age of 30 in Africa. It's 18 to 25 that's going to drive the change. And they've really embraced a lot of what we've done. And I kind of got a hint of what was going to happen in Niger when we did a show there 6 months in the capital of Niamey, 6 months before they had their revolution. When we had the event, and the gymnasium was like standing room only just to look at some art and stuff. So, I mean, so they're ready. As one South African writer told us, he said, our work represents the 21st century equivalent of the new Negro. Because we're the generation, we have no memory of the civil rights movement. We have no memory of a lot of the stuff. And that's why we generally, expect to be treated like anybody else. And my wife, who's a Southern girl, is asking me, she told somebody, said, my husband had to look at across the 38th parallel at North Korean military and these other, he's probably not really afraid of MAGA people. And so that experience, that's why I kind of don't take those people that serious intellectually speaking, because in terms of when I think of this broader worldview, they are the minority and I'm the majority. And that side that they're advocating for is going to lose badly in the long run, simply whether through demographics or other issues. And so learning that and then tapping into what Miyamoto Musashi describes as the void in his book helps pull all these threads together across international borders and how we've worked together in a decentralized way. I just kind of help facilitate it.
And so I just thank you very much for your answer. And since we have a panelist here, I just wanted to see what your reactions were when you saw this exhibition.
Okay. No, this is so wonderful, and actually that Alan's graphic novel that you just mentioned, that I didn't really expect to see something like that, and it was a pleasant surprise. And in a way, that disconnection of like Asia, Africa, but also like Asian Americans, but specifically Japanese Americans and African Americans during the World War II, that, I mean, many people think that Japan attacked Pearl Harbor to invade the United States. That's not the case. That was more like a counterattack, that so that, because Japanese rationale was like that Asia has to resist, and the American empire is racist, right? So, but the Japan itself was a racist as well, and they're committed to the colonization. And it is great to see the representation in that form. And I also want to note that this cross-pollination is really, like, Japan, like, anime is seen as a Japanese thing, but in fact, animation was not born in Japan, right? That Japan learned it from, like, United States. But also many of the storylines that came, like, Japanese animators learned from things like Star Wars, and that turned into the mecha, but also the stylistic element of Japanese animation really came from the limitations. Like, Japanese animator didn't have the resources Disney had. So they had to use lots of, like, stop motions because they couldn't afford creating the movement. And that became a stylistic characteristics of the anime. So that I just want to know this cross-pollination and the resistance and utilization of resources to create the new form is really a center of the anime culture, and it is great to see this formation. Thank you.
Kevin?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yeah. For me, it's been really nice to just explore Afrofuturism as a concept. I think it's something that I've had a cursory knowledge of. It's a word that I hear that gets attached to a lot of different things. So to see kind of a more distinct collection to read, it was really helpful. I also found, we were passing around some readings over the past couple of weeks that I also found really helpful just in terms of just reinstalling Black folks in a future. I really feel like it was summed up nicely in the billboard. I forget who it was by. It's in Pittsburgh. There are Black people in the future. Like, you know, seeing a future with Black folks and seeing many different varieties of that is speculative, is really a beautiful thing, and I think should be highlighted.
Thank you.
So for our students who may have no idea what Afrofuturism is, could you please kind of
Okay.
explain in simple terms?
Yes. Afrofuturism is how people of African descent locate themselves in time and space with agency. So this is a reflection in this space here of future past. We have one aspect that represents the past that informs our future. Zyka's work is in conversation with what Alan's work is about. And what we have here around us is like the present. So you have a conversation going on between the future, the past, and the present simultaneously. And a West African philosophy like that is Sankofa. You go back and get something and bring it forward. So in this moment of kind of reaction in the country, I'm like, I'm not worried. I'm just going to go back and get some friends. And I remember historically, those friends, together with my friends, outnumber these other friends in terms of the grand scheme of things. So my imagination is not limited to my neighborhood or my state. You know, and if I have a passport or whatever, hey, we'll fly, travel. And so that's where I thought this was a timely moment. And similarly, in a way that Japan was an important element in the past. When we talk about this future past piece, China is now the big hegemonic power in that region, and the Chinese scholars and artists, the reason they're doing so well in Africa, or when some of us had a conference in Wuhan, they said, look, for them it's much more of an analytical business kind of thing. They said, look, we never enslaved you, we never colonized you. And so to a lot of people of African descent, that sounds like a pretty good deal, you know, and so let's do business. And I first saw that aspect of future past in the past when I was in the Marine Corps and we go into Hong Kong. When I saw Chinese workers put together a desktop computer in 2 days, and so a lot of us in the service, we had advanced technology before Americans did in terms of desktop computers. You could go into Hong Kong, get a desktop computer built for you for $100 in 1986. So a lot of us bought our desktop computers in Hong Kong, whereas I guess back here they might have been doing the little skinny Apple thing that they had on TV, and we had them. And I remember at the time we were talking about if they can assimilate and produce our technology like that, this country will be something to reckon with in one generation, and it turned out to be true. They became the industrial power that they are by just within a generation after the revolution in China. They swiftly made up their mind that they wanted to be #1 in the world in terms of how they wanted to deal with economics and military aspects and that, and it was just very impressive seeing where China was in the mid-'80s up to now, even though they're starting to run into some problems. And so that's how this future past thing influences a lot of how I think about organizing art in conversation with the present, past, and future, where things are going or forecasted to go.
In your curatorial practice,
Yes.
you often gave a focus on
Yes.
specific dialogue between African culture, African American culture, and other influences. And this particular exhibition focuses on Asian influence. How did you come about that topic?
I thought about black men as culture carriers. Black military men bring hip hop to Asia. In the 80s, we traveled, and because apparently I was from the DC area, so we were kind of biased towards our go-go music, because rap at that time was primarily from black guys and some Puerto Rican guys out of New York. And so we traveling from country to country, and at that time, they didn't have all these fancy terms. They didn't call it hip hop. Like when we pulled into Sydney, Australia, the people asked us, do you all have the new music? That's what the young people, and so they would follow black servicemen to whichever club we went to, because we carried our mixtapes with us. And that's why I had to keep a promise to my mom when my service was up. They wanted to hire me as a DJ in Hong Kong, but I had promised my mother I was going to go back to college, so I went back to college, and, it was a kind of interesting way of trying to fit back in with civilians after you've been overseas for a few years. And my funniest memory of this intersection between rap culture and black men in a club was in the Kowloon district of Hong Kong when Run DMC had a song out called My Adidas, and all the black servicemen took their Adidas off and threw it on the floor, and they thought we were going to start a riot or something. And so people scattered, and they didn't realize we were just kind of paying homage to Run DMC, because we all wore Adidas when we were out on our shore leave. And so we had to hurry up and put our shoes back on and go on about our business of having a good time in Kowloon, in the Kowloon district of Hong Kong. And in the Philippines, I saw how that culture, they seemed to focus more on our dance, because they had a program there where they would rehabilitate incarcerated people through black urban dance. And then in Japan, I remember when Michael Jackson came to Tokyo in the 1980s, it's like Japan lost their minds. There were posters everywhere, all in the subway, because I think it was maybe the Thriller tour or something, and they just went crazy. People were crying in the streets, the airport. I'm like, I'd never seen a country cry over a black dude like this. When Michael Jackson comes to Japan, and then the way we were embraced in the South Pacific, in Polynesia, from the Maori people of New Zealand or the Aboriginal people of Australia, they looked at our music as like resistance music. They were like, yeah, we're black too, we're just from the South Pacific. And so there were different elements based upon where we went in terms of how people reacted to us. Yeah, and that's where that curiosity and seeing as different geographical contexts came into play, and learning to listen to other cultures tell you who they are before you open your mouth. Because I learned how to shop in Thailand, and I learned this thing of what they say, talking tea, where you're supposed to sit down and drink tea and have conversation before you make the offer of how much you're going to pay for the artifact. And I learned that going to Thailand, about talking tea, just sitting down in conversation before you purchase something. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
So in our exhibition, there's one artist, Guillaume Savier's illustration, pixel arts illustration of Japanese jazz singer Kimiko with Herbie Hancock. So there is that kind of exchange illustrated as art form in order to kind of develop, add more to it. Kevin, do you have some comments, or you have some knowledge on this kind of exchange of collaboration between black musician and Asian musician?
Sure, I have questions. I mean, I think it's great, and obviously that's a moment that they shared. So we would have to ask them what their feelings were. I would not want to project a story onto music. I remember we had, when I came aware of this, one of the first questions I had is, what if it was switched? And if a Japanese artist playing folkloric Japanese music had come to America to meet a black American playing that music, right? I'm curious if it would have raised different questions.
Definitely, yeah.
Oh, no, I'm just asking. I don't know.
They've had influence here. You look at a lot of I can't remember the gentleman's name. He's a Japanese American artist, was very influential, and that's why I wish Tim was here, who designed a lot of the album covers that we were attracted to in the 70s, that were either jazz covers, because at the time, we did not know this was a Japanese man unless you were a commercial artist. So they were really involved with how they brought their sensibility to black music as it was aesthetically presented in the 70s. Because, I mean, my people in my neighborhood, we're looking at Bruce Lee and the Green Hornet. And then you had disco out, where there were some songs around the topic. And it's because all these military veterans are coming back overseas. A lot of them opened up martial arts studios in black neighborhoods. And so that's where I could see all of that coming together in the 70s, when you got, it started with the Korean War, but heavily the Vietnam generation brought back martial arts to our neighborhoods back in the late 60s, early 70s. And then the art shows up in certain select album covers that were very important signature works in R&B and jazz in the 70s. My brother Kenjo introduced me to this Japanese jazz group called Hiroshima that was very popular in the 70s. And so yeah, it's one of those things. They've been here amongst us, influenced us in very subtle ways. Primarily, and when Dr. Sams was here, that's why you kind of, when you see African Americans arguing artistically or politically, it's kind of like Gandhi versus Mao, you know, or Gandhi versus whatever. Those two philosophical traditions show up in some of our political discourse, you know, inadvertently. That generation that's influenced by Gandhi and the other ones that are influenced by Mao or Kim Il-sung or Ho Chi Minh or other writers in terms of this political discourse around art and what type of activities that you ought to participate in. And then if you want to get spicy, throw in Che Guevara. So, you know, in terms of what that looks like. So.
Earlier in my conversation with you, Reynaldo, you talked about your time when you were an educator teaching children and how you started using art as a medium to communicate some of your teaching points. And could you talk a little bit about the role of art in context of Afrofuturism? What is
My thing is you can't, you know, a lot of educators talk about, oh, the children of the future, but you got to show it to them first. You can't just talk to them about it. And since a lot of people are visual learners, now I worked at one of the toughest middle schools in St. Louis while I was working on my doctorate. I think we were #1 in the city for teachers getting assaulted. And so, oh yeah, and so I threw out and just, I got permission from the principal to be like, look, they're driving you crazy. I want to do something, but I'm going to close my door. I'm going to lower the blinds, and it's going to sound a little bit different. And so, because so many young people, especially boys, lose interest in reading between the 3rd and 6th grade, I threw out this thing they call the canon, because most of the teachers who teach literature happen to be women, and a lot of young boys, they're not interested in reading what the teacher wants to read. They want to read what they want to read. So my thing is, I told them, I don't care what you read. I want you just to be able to read, become taxpayers so you can finance my Social Security. So I remember the bridge for me, my mother let me read comic books. That was the transition from all that Cat in the Hat, all that other kind of stuff, because I could see visually the story and how it looks when it's being explained. So I raised up the reading scores in my school in 1 year, letting them read comic books as the language arts, comic books, and they didn't call it urban fiction. They were like gangster novels. You know, because they were, you know, the author's name, he had a book called Black Girl in Trouble. He's the best-selling black author of all time. I can't think of his name, but it's called urban fiction. And so, and I didn't realize I was doing what they called multiple ways of instruction at the same time. So I had a class where I had to teach my immigrants the ABCs. I had to deal with, because this is also during the time when they mainstreamed special needs people, so I had to show them how to construct a paragraph. And then I had the other section of class reading comics and urban fiction. And then I had my really, really bright student who was like 13 years old reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. And that's what you call differentiated instruction from Reynaldo Anderson's point of view. And because everybody was reading what they liked, I had few disruptive problems in the class. And everybody would focus on their work. And there were people like, how do you keep them quiet? I mean, I just let them read what they want to read, because then they would take ownership of their work. And you could understand, they said, I'm doing my work, not Mr. Anderson's work. So it did not become an adversarial thing where I got to stand on top of it. And because I respected them enough in that way, after they did their work, then they would have to come do some traditional stuff for me to meet the No Child Left Behind initiative or whatever. I'd say, all right, I got to teach you all this stuff because you're going to get a test with a bunch of boxes you're going to check off to prove how much you know. And that's where I found the equilibrium between helping them read what they liked versus them reading what I liked or what people in some bureaucratic office think they should be reading.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is definitely great methods in teaching. We should all incorporate that. We have a question. I know we'll have you also comment, but Jermaine has a question.
Yeah, this is a great panel. Thank you, Dr. Anderson, for the exhibit, for your talking points here, which is so illuminating for me. And I think my question connects to Haywan's last question in your earlier point about in response to the process and sort of language barriers, right?
Yeah.
So when we think about sort of people moving and the exchange and amalgamation of cultures and ideas between the African diaspora and Asia, you highlight our military and service people, and then we also, I think of athletes as well, right? But one of the things that comes to mind for me, having taught English in South Korea, and having worked with this institution at some point, partnerships with our Chinese institutions and having visited China, with the pipeline of teachers throughout these Asian countries who are brought there to teach English, right? And who have done so, you know, for absolutely post World War II, right? What might be the role of these English teachers? And I'm sort of thinking about language
Yeah.
and the import of language and multilingualism as it exists in West Africa, but the role of these English teachers in being incubators for concepts of Afrofuturism, like those servicemen who long carry the tradition.
I remember my father, because he was in military intelligence in the Air Force as a captain. He explained to me about the importance of language. He said, in the military political world, the importance of the language is driven by countries that deliver science and economics. He said, these languages are number one. He said, if you go to Europe, son, you only really need to know English and German, because those languages are the tops in terms of international business and science patents. And that time, there were, like he said, 5 or 6 languages. He said, if you want to move around internationally, you just need to know English, German, Russian, Japanese, and another, I can't think of the other one, because those languages are the most dominant languages in the areas of business, politics, and science. And so that's how, like I was telling my daughter when they were in high school, if you want to work for the government or the State Department, study Arabic. If you want to do international business, study Mandarin. If you want to do, so that's kind of where, because in the middle of the last century, English displaced French as the international politically diplomatic language. And because when we train with other militaries, when we would do training with the Republic of Korea ROK Marines or with the Japanese, we only communicated in English. And I think that is because of the hegemonic position that America had after World War II, when basically America created globalization and underwrote it for a few generations. As a guy in Denmark explained to me, your army is our army. That's why we can send our kids to college for free, because we only have one submarine. And what they call a military, they're trained to say, look, we're taught we only have to fight for 30 minutes before the Americans show up. And so that is that kind of arrangement's coming to an end, you know. And so English is probably the easiest language to get your work published in. As a friend of mine talked about, he said he's very brilliant, but he was speaking Dutch at the time, and he's from a small Caribbean island called Curacao. And so he said, I had to teach English so people would know about my work, because I've met a lot of brilliant people in other geographies who people don't know about simply because they don't speak English, Mandarin, or French.
So I was thinking, perhaps we can just put more than the importance of English,
Yeah.
and the significance of English, and all
Okay, can I, there's conduits, and here's the more complex thing, if you wouldn't even get it to a metaphysical level. The British taught us how to be globalizers. They were the people in charge before us, and the British kind of provided us with the blueprint for how that works. There was a guy, Francis Bacon, who created the term New Atlantis, or the New World, or what they would say in Spanish, Nuevo Mundo. And Francis Bacon and they invented metaphysically this idea of world domination, metaphysically first, and then they found a way to pay for it by killing indigenous people and getting free labor from Africa to pay for it. But they dealt with the metaphysical issue first. And so English has a certain way of interacting with the metaphysical assumptions of different cultures in terms of how they might organize their ideas or creations. And that's why I'm fascinated with Asian cultures like manga having to read right to left instead of left to right to understand what the story is about. That is a linguistic, cultural, metaphysical thing that they kept in terms of how they interpret what they're creating. So they might study English for the political, economic stuff, but they basically still, on a metaphysical level, are operating with their own cultural agency. And so that is the thing in the movement about process. I said, while we're embraced in different geographic reasons, we talk to people about, don't try to imitate us, create from your own geographic cultural matrix. Because as a theorist, I'll present an idea, and then I say, okay, I want you to give your own spin on this, your own interpretation on this, based upon what you think, not what I think. You don't, African Americans different from Afro-Brazilians, they have several different regions they organize, from Amazonia to Sao Paulo to the Northeast region or Rio. So they have, even inside their own country, they have several regions that they are geographically grappling with when they are dealing with Afrofuturism, or what they would call Afrofuturismo, or what the curator Pamela Fasimo Sandstrom, who influenced how I thought about Afrofuturism, and she really created the term African futurism by critiquing what Mark Derry first tried to coin in talking to 3 black artists or creatives in Manhattan a generation ago. And so our transnational perspective is informed by the local geography or cultural geography of reason that people operate from. So we're not like a Disney Marvel thing of telling people do what we do. Hey, this is the network, here's a concept, work with it within your own way of doing it. And because of Star Trek, we got phones and AI, and we can talk to each other through the communicators now with our phones now, where the idea of that communication device in Star Trek came from. So, and we just give people space to be whoever they are.
Can I actually add something? I have a thought on that too. Just English teachers as a conduit for Afrofuturism, because there are different dialects of English that have different cachet in different social situations, right? So you talked about kind of this idea of excelling in business and learning English to participate in this sort of I guess a certain kind of socioeconomic bracket, right? I would also say that hip-hop vernacular also has a certain social cachet, as in the same way that you were passing out mixtapes across Asia. So I would say that teaching English also serves as a conduit for Afrofuturism through the spread of hip-hop as well.
And in America now, like a friend of mine, John Jennings and Regina, I can't think of her last name, inside Afrofuturism, when we talk about just the southern part of the country, we talk about this term called cyber trap. Like cyberpunk deals with high-tech, low culture, and Gibson's idea of the future is here, but it's unevenly distributed. So we're talking about what is it going to be like in, say, a generation you're hanging out in the trap house, but you got advanced technology doing some things. Or cyberfunk that Milton Davis put out in an anthology, for example, paralleling cyberpunk in some ways, but cyberpunk being, I guess, because I'm a fan of this movie that some of you all are too young to know about called Johnny Mnemonic, like a segregated North Philadelphia or North St. Louis in the future, and I asked my students how much money it would cost for them to allow someone to give them money now that the future's here with Elon Musk. If they say they will give you $1 million to put a chip in your head and go and transport it somewhere, some of them in the class said, I'd charge $100,000 or so forth or so on. And so I told them, I said, so the radicalism you all as Gen Z are telling me, as children of Gen Xers, you all are kind of cliche being radical, but you're just chasing a brand. You're not doing anything that much different. So, because we hear from the young people a lot this time, oh, my brand, my brand. I'm like, you're not a corporation, you know? And so yeah, so now this kind of cyberpunk thing that Gibson and Neil Stevenson have forecast is now here. And now people are trying to figure out, and so Afrofuturism allows us to understand it, what's happening. And then comparing, say, a Gibson with somebody like a Samuel Delaney or Nalo Hopkinson, if I'm an Afro-Caribbean, or some of the work that Nadia Corfor is putting out with her book Lagoon, and the impact of climate change. And so it's become this kind of umbrella approach for understanding swift change that's happening to us right now, that's kind of displacing the previous stuff that we were taught, and that we're kind of chucking all of it now to understand what's happening to us.
Because of the time constraints,
Okay.
we'll take maybe a couple of questions from the audience. You have any burning desire to ask the panelists a question, please, now it's time. Professor Zuberman has something to say? Otherwise, do you have any final comments? Ryoko?
So is the Afrofuturism course being taught here at SUNY yet?
Not that I know of,
Okay.
right? Afrofuturism is not being taught at SUNY. Not yet.
Not,
Yeah, Old Westbury. No.
Okay. I'm available. Hey, yeah.
All right, so the time is up, and thank you very much. I'll give you the panelists and Reynaldo a round of applause. We have about an hour, less than an hour remaining until the end of the show. So please enjoy, be merry.